In this video, we're going to walk through the Microsoft Lab about hosting your domain on Azure DNS. Now, Azure DNS is, well, it's DNS that allows you to host various DNS domains such as Microsoft.com on it, and it allows you to work through this directly in Azure as opposed to separately with your DNS registrar. The fact that we're able to do this directly in Azure means that we can quickly and easily tie our DNS activities in with our virtual machine and our website activities so that when we're working on one, it can positively affect the other. So let's go ahead and get started. Here on the introduction, it talks about what DNS is. It gives a little bit of a background as far as what DNS is and how it starts to work. There we go. What is DNS? DNS in its simplest form, your computer talks to IP addresses. And DNS takes names such as www.worldwideimports.com and translates that into an IP address such as 156.42.79.101. Once that name is translated into the IP address, the machine can then access the IP address. So that's the purpose of DNS. Talks a little bit about how the DNS works. Basically, my computer goes up to the root of the internet and says, hey, Mr. Internet Root, how do I get to www.worldwideimports.com? And they say, oh, well, I know where .com is. And so we go talk over there. And then you talk to the .com people and they say, hey, where's Worldwide Imports? And they say, oh, well, their server is over there. So go ask them about www. And so then you go talk to Worldwide Imports and you say, hey, where's www? And then they finally return back an IP address. Yeah. That's a whole lot there. We can dive into that for hours with regards to our DNS discussion. But basically, it allows us to keep a name so that we can then use friendly names instead of having to memorize IP addresses. There are DNS Lookup Requests, say IPv4, IPv6. DNS works for both of these, and so we definitely need to make sure we are aware of that, especially with regards to IPv6. Since an IPv6 address may look like that, which is extremely difficult for me to remember. DNS settings for your domain, yeah, traditionally they've been handled by third parties, third-party vendors such as your DNS registrar, or managed in-house. This basically meant you had to have a server, or more realistically, 2 servers or more running in your environment, handling nothing but DNS. A little bit of information about DNS record types and record sets. And then Azure DNS, hey, what's the benefit of it? Well, it's really easy to use. It really helps improve your security, and then the fact that it ties in directly with Azure makes it super, super easy and flexible. All right. Configuring Azure DNS, there's 2 different ways that we can configure Azure DNS. We can create what's called a public zone or a private zone. A public zone basically is just DNS that's for the rest of the world to get access to. So that when I am at home and I type in www.worldwideimports.com, I get a public IP address. In order to do this, well, it's just a couple of steps, which we will be walking through here shortly. Step number 1, create the DNS zone in Azure. You see a screenshot of what that would look like right there. Step number 2, get your Azure DNS name servers. Now, the name servers that we see here in the red there are the Azure name servers. When you go out and you register www.worldwideimports.com from some third-party registrar, they will have their own name servers that they will suggest you use. What you would have to do to have Azure hold your DNS is you would have to actually move them over to these guys, which is why you need to get those name servers. And then I believe in the next step, they say, yeah, update your registrar to point to them. Lastly, verify delegation, in which case you can do an NS lookup command in order to verify the registration. We'll actually do that shortly. And then step number 5, create all your records. A private DNS zone is the same idea. It's pretty much the same process as doing a public DNS zone, except this is for the inside of your organization. The inside of your organization may be a slightly different DNS name. For instance, you can see here they have the example private.worldwideimports.com, or sometimes they call it worldwideimports.com as well, the same as their external, but they have different sets of records between them. So it's pretty much the same process. Create the private, except in this case you specify which networks, which internal networks you want it to go to. You link them, and then you just start creating your records. So with that being said, let's go ahead and look into this. So I'm going to start off by activating a sandbox. Sandbox just gives me permission in order to create this essentially free from Microsoft. All right, and so once that's done, we're going to create an external facing zone, DNS zone in Azure DNS. So it's going through, creating the resource group, getting all the permissions. We'll wait to make sure that says it's confirmed. See, set up Azure DNS, create public DNS zone. We will create some A records and we will verify that that works from my home computer. We will actually confirm that those records are available on the internet. All right, so step number one in order to create the DNS zone is I need to open the Azure portal. So I'm going to go ahead and open that in another tab. I'll actually move the instructions on my other screen so I can see what I'm doing. See, first step says go ahead and click Create Resource. And what we're looking for here is a DNS zone. Now, if I scroll down here under Popular, I don't see DNS. Nope. I don't see DNS over here underneath the categories. So I'm going to cheat, and I'm just going to come up here to the search box, and I'm going to type in DNS. There we go, DNS zone. Imagine that. And create. All right, so the subscription resource groups are already defined for me. Right there. Let's see, this zone is a child. No, it's not going to be the child of an existing zone. And then they suggest for the DNS name to do something like worldwideimports.com with some letters after it or before it. I'm actually going to do ECG worldwideimports.com. I got the green check mark over there on the right hand side. Now DNS names need to be unique. Oops. Unique. Not just unique within Azure, but unique across the entire world. If I try to go ahead and register Microsoft.com, it's going to say, no, you can't do that. That's already in use. Okay, let's go ahead and review and create. So it's going to create the DNS zone. It shouldn't take very long. It's going to put a couple of records in there, specifically the NS or name server, and then the start of authority or SOA records. All right, so there we have our domain, ecgworldwideimports.com. We can see over here on the right hand side, it's the name servers provided to me from Microsoft or from Azure. Again, if I registered this with a third-party registrar, which if I was actually going to use this domain, I would have to, then I would have to go in and I would have to update their name server records to point to these right here. So what we want to do is, let's see, can we actually view the records? Oh, there we go. We can actually view the existing records. We'll see right here is an NS or name server record, which just points to all of the name servers that are valid for this domain. We then also have the SOA or start of authority record, which points to the start of authority, the server that has full administrative authority over this domain, which is ns102.azuredns.com. Oops, let's go back. All right, so I want to go ahead and let's just create some records. So I'm going to go ahead and say record set, plus for the record set. Type of record, I want to create an A record. Very briefly, an A record translates a name to an IPv4 address. Quad A, a name to an IPv6 address. A C name is what's referred to as an alias. MX, TXT, CAA, those are different types of records with very specific needs. For right now, we're just talking about how the DNS works, so I'm going to leave it at that. So the record I'm going to create is www, and in theory, since this is pointing out to the internet, I would actually put in a public IP address here. However, because I don't have a public IP address, I just want to type something in here. So I'm just going to type in any valid IPv4 address. In this case, 10.10.10.10, because that's really, really easy for me to type and to remember. I'll say OK, creates the new record, and then I will see it down here at the bottom. There's my A record for www. Now, if I open up a command prompt on my local computer here, the command I would type in order to find that is going to be, there we go, Dns Lookup www.ecgworldwideimports.com. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to look against whatever my local DNS server is. And it's going to say, hey, where's worldwide imports? And it's going to say, I don't know, let me go ask somebody else, who's going to say, I don't know, let me go ask somebody else. And they're going to ask a whole bunch of different computers before they finally come back and they're going to say, we can't find this. This domain does not exist. And it doesn't exist because, well, it doesn't exist. I've never actually registered this domain, therefore I can't actually use it. However, using NSLookup, I can actually go against one of these name servers and specifically say, don't ask just anybody on the internet, ask this server specifically for this lookup or for this domain name. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, ns1-02.azure-dns.com. So this is saying, hey, go ask this specific server for this DNS record. And when I hit enter, it comes back and says, oh yeah, hey, I know where worldwideimports.com, or sorry, ecg.worldwideimports.com is. It is at 10.10.10.10. If you didn't fully understand that, I definitely suggest you look more into how DNS works, specifically with how NSLookup works, and with regards to DNS, so that it makes more sense and is easier to understand there. In case you're wondering, well, was name server 1? What about name server 2 or name server 3? Yeah, those work as well. Go ahead and change it to ns2. Ooh. Oh, it's dns.net, not .com. All right, so that was the first set of commands there. Very briefly, we created the DNS zone. Created a DNS record. In this case, it was just a single A record. We then verified using NSLookup. All right, next. See, it then talks about dynamically resolving resource names. Talks about what an apex domain is. An apex domain essentially means the root of the domain. This is essentially some basic DNS stuff you might need to look at. Utilizes the @ symbol to specify the root of the domain. Talks about an alias records, use of alias records, and so on. All right, next is we're going to create those alias records. And in this case, we're talking about deploying a website. So in theory, we created a website and we just set our DNS record pointing to www. It was a great success. Everybody was really happy with it. But our server is overwhelmed. In theory, it was only one server, so now we have to add more servers, and we want to set it up using a load balancer. And in order to do that, we need to change our DNS when we're done. So let's go ahead and set up our virtual machines with a load balancer. We'll then configure our alias records, and then we will resolve them to confirm. So first step, setting up the environment. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and run this git clone command right here. Git clone, basically it's going to download from GitHub some various code that is used specifically for this lab. We're then going to change into the directory. We're then going to set some permissions on one of the files, and then we're going to run the commands in that file. So it talks down here about what's happening in this script, in this setup.sh script that we're looking at right here. If we want, we can actually open up a new tab. We can go to this file and we can actually see, hey, in setup.sh, these are all the commands we're doing. It's 140 different lines. Wow. Let's see. So it's creating a virtual network for our VMs. And we can see the AZ network VNet create command there, telling us to create a VNet in our network of Azure. Then create a network security group or something to have permissions around those VNets. Create a couple of network cards. Create what's called an availability set. And then in those availability sets, create 2 virtual machines. When that's done, our VMs are completed, and then we start setting up a load balancer that our 2 VMs will be behind. First off is we create a public IP, and then we create a load balancer, and then we create what's called a probe for the load balancer. Basically, it's a way of saying, is a server healthy? Then we create rules for the load balancers that specify which ports, in this case port 80, should be sent through the load balancer. And then lastly, we update our NICs, and we join them to the load balancers. And there's 2 NICs, so we do that twice. All right. Is it still running? It's still running. It's creating the availability set right now. But so that's what that script is doing. You can definitely read through the content a whole lot more in order to get more specifics on it. But yeah, it breaks down, create the security groups, create the NICs, creates the VMs, creates a virtual network and puts the VMs in it, configures load balancer, and adds the NICs to the load balancers. All right, so that is in the process. It then says, hey, let's go back to the Azure portal. Let's see, can I continue this while we're still waiting? I will still, no, I need to wait until I have a public IP address. All right, and thanks to the power of video editing, you were able to fast forward right through that. It took several minutes. That seemed to take a long time, but when we look at everything that it just did, including creating virtual machines, setting up load balancers, configuring the load balancers to automatically fail over if an issue is found, and then configuring everything together, that really wasn't a lot. With that being said, if I was doing this on a daily basis, I would probably find ways to speed that up. So let's go ahead and let's create our DNS record. All right, so I'm back in my domain here. I'm gonna add a record set. I'm gonna leave the name to blank. I'm gonna say, yes, this is an alias, type of A, yes. I am going to choose the alias, should be my IP. Why is my, do I need to refresh this page? Let's try that. Alias record, Azure resource. My IP is not showing up in there. Oh, there we go. I start typing and it shows up. TTL, I'm going to leave as default and say OK. All right, so what that does is now we have a load balancer and we have a public public DNS pointing to that. When we go in and we look at our public IP, let's see, let's go back to home and all resources. Should be able to find my public IP right there. So we now have a public IP address of this, which should be pointing to both of our servers. If I copy and paste that into a new web browser, that should take me to a basic website. Yeah, okay, this is WebVM1. Let's see, does hitting refresh change that? Nope. I'm back in the lab here. I clicked check my work and it said complete. And then finally we get to the summary. Really? Finally we get to the summary as opposed to actually having more fun with the load balancer, but this lab wasn't about the load balancer. So there we go. We went and we set up a DNS environment, in this case worldwideimports.com. We then created some DNS records for it, and we automatically created a reference to an Azure resource. In this case, the Azure resource was my public IP, but that could be any other Azure resource that we can modify dynamically.